This is another iRaw podcast.
So looking at the ways in which Anglophone people are consuming animal cafes in Japan, I see a lot more nuanced critical discussion happening over on Reddit. Whereas when you speak of influencers, like there's a very popular trend on YouTube of people going to pet cafes and like counting how many they can go to, or live streaming themselves going and visiting a ton of them. So it's a much more celebratory sort of influencery, like it's a mishmash of this kind of very exoticizing I'm going to Japan culture mixed with exoticizing animals, right? And the ways that they're bound together I find really fascinating in terms of the stories that we tell about Japan and the ways in which Western cultures tend to frame Japanese culture or consuming Japanese culture in terms of consumption, in terms of cuteness, in terms of experiences, like experience Japan, experience cool, weird, strange, kawaii Japan. So yeah, so I definitely think, as you were saying, the monetizing people who are monetizing influencers have a big voice, I think, in trying to promote this to a lot of people online through social media.
Hello everyone, welcome back to The Animal Turn. This is season 8, where we're focused on animals in media, and we've got that kind of cross-cut theme of animals in difference / animals in race running through this season as well. Today, 3 guests join me to speak about a very, very important topic, and that is social media. I think social media has made an appearance in pretty much every single episode that we've discussed this season so far. So I think it's good that we have a spot of time here to focus in particular on social media. And the themes in this episode go pretty wide. We talk about everything from the impacts and effects of social media accounts on animals, both in terms of representation, but also materially and physically. What representations of animals can do, as well as this kind of drive for people to show off animals, right, to get things like selfies. And towards the end of the episode, we speak a little bit about not only the negatives, but also the potentials of social media to help when it comes to things like scholarship and activism that aim to center animals. It's a wide-ranging and interesting conversation, and it continues our focus on looking at different forms of media in this second part of the season. Let me tell you a bit about my guests. First up, there's Laura Fernández, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Barcelona, where she is part of the Center for the Research in Information, Communication and Culture. She holds a BA in Social and Cultural Anthropology, an MA in International Studies of Media, Power and Difference, and a PhD in Communication. Her work is focused on critical animal studies, strategic visual communication, social movements, feminist and LGBTQ plus communication studies, and fat studies. She is a member of the UPF Center for Animal Ethics and ECAS, European Association for Critical Animal Studies. Amanda Weiss is Associate Professor of Japanese at Georgia Institute of Technology, where she teaches courses on Japanese media and society. She also runs a VIP, or vertically integrated project, East Asian Media, with student projects that have included archival work, translation, photography, and media analysis. Her book, Han Heroes and Yamato Warriors, explores contemporary East Asian remembrance of World War II. She's currently working on a Japanese language textbook on anime studies and a collected volume on Japanese futurism. All very cool. And I'll actually say, just last month, I don't know if you are aware of the Vienna Animal Studies group. I've helped to launch the group here in Vienna together with a whole bunch of others, and we've been hosting a series of lectures, and we just had our first visiting lecture, which was really amazing, by Barbara Holtis, and she spoke about pet keeping in Japan, and it was unbelievably interesting and rich and dynamic. So that's a random side plug for the Vienna Animal Studies group and for Barbara's work. And just a note that if you're ever visiting Vienna, reach out to me. Random plug. Okay, back to the guests. The third of the speakers, or the guests who are joining me today, you've already met Siobhan Sperian. She joined us on a grad review a couple of seasons back together with Josh. We're still when I was feeling out what the Animal Turn was about. And Siobhan and I are good friends. We both studied at Queen's University, and she's a wild animal welfare scholar and animal geographer who conducts transdisciplinary research at the intersection of welfare, conservation, and sustainable tourism in Costa Rica. She focuses in particular on primate sanctuaries, and she's published quite widely on them. She joined York University in 2024 as a postdoctoral visitor, continuing her collaboration with Dr. Alice Havolka and the project The Lives of Animals Research Group. She founded the Costa Rican Monkey Interest Group to connect wildlife researchers, caregivers, and professionals committed to improving monkey lives. Siobhan has published on primate rehabilitation, animal labor, tourism ethics, and the phenomenon of wildlife selfies. So we have, again, a rich, interesting conversation. Just as a quick side note, please remember to rate, review, and leave comments for the podcast. We're nearing the end of the year and the end of the season, so those are really helpful with others finding the show. Also, if you're interested, we do have a merch store that sells, cool T-shirts and random bits and bobs. As we're approaching Christmas time, I suppose it's a time when people buy random stuff. If you wanted to support the show, there's an option and an opportunity to do so there. It's all produced through T-Mill, so prices are slightly larger, but that's to ensure that there are good working conditions and that all the products are made are vegan. So check out our merch store. The link is on our website as well. And finally, thank you to Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law, and Ethics, A.P.P.L.E, for sponsoring this podcast, as well as the folks at Georgia Tech and the Pollination Project for co-sponsoring this season. All right, that's it. Enjoy the show. Hello. Welcome back to the Animal Tone podcast. It's great to have you on the show, Laura, Amanda, and Siobhan. This is an important episode. I think in pretty much every episode I've recorded for this season so far, two mediums have come up. Film has always come up, and social media has always come up, because I think they're types of media we interact with often. And when it comes to animals, I think social media, I don't know, there's a very interesting and complicated relationship with animals and media. And the three of you have had different interactions with animals and media. Amanda, you've interacted and thought about cats in cat cafes in Japan, and you've seen the ways in which people are posting about that in Japan, and how Japanese culture is using these kinds of spaces to talk about it. Siobhan, you've done a lot of work with regards to thinking about animals conservation, also in terms of like how animals are represented and used in selfies and what this could mean for their welfare. And Laura, both with regards to animals and other social movements, you've thought a little bit about how mass media has been used to, I guess, in social movement mobilization or strategic communication. Now, these could all be connected to social media, and I'm hoping in some shape or form we'll touch on some of these topics today. But why don't we, instead of me telling everyone about you guys, like I know you better than yourselves, why don't each of you tell us and the audience a little bit about how you came to think, I guess, about animals, but also about social media. Like, how did social media become something you wanted to comment on? Laura, why don't we start with you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here and share this conversation with you. I was thinking about this question, like what got me interested in non-human animals. And I was thinking that when I was a child, I had like a great interest and curiosity of other animals, like, for instance, observing snails or insects carefully and, I don't know, talking to dogs and so on. But what got me interested in studying non-human animals and also in becoming an activist for non-human animals, in my case, was bullfighting, because in my cultural context, when I was a teenager, that was something that happened in the TV. It was like normal to see that. So I was quite outraged and horrified about it. So it kind of created me like the idea that what happened with this? Like, how can we tolerate this violence in media, and how can we fight about that? So that was kind of the first thing that led me to veganism and animal liberation activism, and then also to critical animal studies. And after that, well, I did my PhD on strategic communication and social movements. and in particular on explicit violence and moral shock regarding non-human representation. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of issues, but it's quite connected with that start.
I mean, I think the question of moral shock is so important here because it's a key strategy that a lot of activists use. So you mentioned their bullfighting, and I think it comes up so often. I've seen several. It's interesting because depending on who's posting, you get different kinds of images of the bulls coming up. But often, whether it's activists or people celebrating the bull fights or the running of the bulls, you do get kind of quite explicitly violent images. A lot of blood, a lot of action. And I do think when activists share, they're often trying to facilitate this kind of moral shock, whereas participants might be sharing the same image. And it's not moral shock they're trying to get, right? They're trying to, I don't know, they're trying to show fun or thrill or something, which is really remarkable that you can have the same image working in different ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's quite interesting, like how the audience interpret the same image. I mean, there's a whole thing to discuss there, like what's moving and how are we looking at other animals. And I would say in the case of bullfighting, like those who are in favor of it try to present it as an art. So they try to make like the aesthetics of violence look like something, I don't know, interesting, or this supremacy as something, artistic, I would say. Yeah, there's also like an ethical issue around that, like the aestheticization of violence, right? How, I mean, that's one of the things that I think we may be careful about when we use moral shock as a strategy as animal activists, because of course it has a lot of opportunities for people to recognize and know about this oppressive practice towards non-human animals, but at the same time, there's a risk there that we're going to normalize or even create or favor that people that feel pleasure around this violence, I don't know, kind of reproduce and keep perpetuating like this violence, right?
Yeah, and I mean, as someone, like, I know I actually struggle to look at any of these now. The second I see any sort of, I kind of try to scroll through it. And this, for me at least, is not for lack of knowing that violence. I think that more a matter of, there's something to be said for not looking at it all the time and being constantly exposed to, especially when you really are trying to think about what that animal's going through. But sometimes one of the most poignant pictures I've seen of the bullfights popped up recently, actually, of a bull standing with his head against the door, not engaging in the fight at all, absolutely refusing to engage in the fight, and just clearly showing with his body that he wanted to leave. And that kind of showed in many ways the social violence of what's going on, instead of always focusing on the kind of the overt physical violence, which I thought was really remarkable. Amanda, how about you? How did you come to start thinking about animals and social media?
Yeah, so actually it came about because I was invited to participate in this conference that we did about animals, and that was organized by Natalie Cazal at Georgia Tech. But I will say, on a personal note, I've always been pretty animal obsessed, I would say, particularly dog obsessed. I have a dog who right now, as I speak to you, he's at the vet and we're worried about him, his allergies and all this stuff. And just, it's been kind of a, I don't know, I'm kind of like the crazy neighborhood dog lady, you know, I'm always babysitting people's dogs. And I don't know. And just when Natalie invited me to do this conference, it got me thinking about my own experiences. So I come from Japanese cultural studies, and I primarily look at Japanese media and the ways in which Japanese media tells stories about Japan and Japanese identity. My most recent book was about war memory in Japan and the ways in which it differed between Japan and China. And so when Natalie invited me to this, I thought a little bit about my own experience with animals in Japan and my own experience seeing the ways that people cared for animals or the ways that they interacted with animals or thought about animals. And animal cafes came to mind. Like a lot of people, when I went to Japan, I went and visited a few different animal cafes. And this is something I'll talk about in a minute, but like for a lot of people who go, you go thinking it's kind of fun or, you know, something light, and then you often realize the major issues that are at play when you go into these places for these animals in terms of welfare, in terms of There are even poaching potential issues, exotic animals like owls and capybara and others. And you see, they're in downtown Tokyo in this tiny little fluorescent lit room as tourists, one after another, come in to pet them. Or even in the quote unquote nicer places like cat cafes, you're thinking like, how often do these cats get to rest or be away? So I thought a lot about my own positionality there. And I think that's where this research study came from. I started to look online at the ways in which different people in the Anglophone sphere talk about animal cafes in Japan, the ways in which they connect it to ideas about Japan as a nation or Japan as a culture. And I also started looking into how in Japanese media, people write about this and also respond to it. So this is the beginning of a research project that'll eventually be a kind of comparative study of Anglophone and Japanese language social media around the topic of animal cafes and the ways in which sometimes they're in dialogue with each other, especially Japanese online discourse towards Anglophone discourse.
Wow, that's a fascinating project. I lived in South Korea for some time, and at the time, cat cafes were kind of just starting. You could see there was this slight uptick in cat cafes coming about. And then, South Korea, at least, is the type of place that once a trend takes hold, it really takes hold. So there would be like gimmicky cafes of sorts, all sorts of gimmicks. But at some point, the animals started to be kind of taken as part of these gimmick ways of consuming them, kind of like a petting zoo with coffee. And yeah, you're right. There's lots. Wasn't it a couple of years ago where I think it was in Seoul, where there was a zebra strolling through Seoul again from like a pet cafe of sorts, and you're like, what is a? And I need to double check. Myself on this. I think it was in Seoul, but nonetheless, I think the emergence of these cafes, it's interesting as a social dynamic as well, because it does to me point to something that people want to interact with animals. We've got a desire to interact with animals, but oftentimes we don't think about the ways in which we interact with them and how the economies and the ways in which we consume them impact them, actually influence their lives, right, in really important ways. Okay, great. So we've got Spain and bulls we've already touched on, cats in Japan, which we're definitely going to dive more into. But Siobhan, when it comes to also thinking about animals and consumption, you've done a lot of work with thinking about animals and selfies, right? So maybe you could tell us a bit about that while also sprinkling us with some of your research, because the listeners have heard from you before. Welcome back onto the show. It's great to have you back.
So I've been a lifelong lover of animals and wanted to be Jane Goodall when I grew up, like a lot of folks who study primates today. And I ended up kind of taking a roundabout path where I did zoology and English in my undergrad. I did a master's in English literature, which was, for me, still applicable because I focused on like post-humanism, science fiction, eco-criticism. And then I went into the social studies in environmental studies at Queen's University. And there I kind of had I was given a wide berth in terms of what did I want to study. And so I took about a year of my PhD to kind of narrow it down. And I remembered that I had a really great experience in Costa Rica doing a primatology field course in undergrad. And I looked into the sort of wildlife tourism opportunities that they had in Costa Rica with captive wildlife. And in Costa Rica, it is illegal to privately own animals. So it's illegal to feed them, to hold them, to interact with them outside of like a veterinary or health setting. And so all of these sanctuaries are legally registered as zoos and sometimes rescue centers. But that dual licensing allows sanctuaries in Costa Rica to kind of operate on a zoo side where folks can come in and see animals and there's no interaction with them beyond just looking. And then they will have like a rescue center license where they can rescue and rehabilitate animals to put back into the wild, ideally, or maybe long-term care in the sanctuary side. So yeah, Costa Rica is pretty interesting in that it has very strict environmental laws that protect animals. And yet, like I think some years ago now, they were assessed at one of the top 10 countries for wildlife selfies and using animals as photo props. And I think it's probably gotten better because a few years ago as well, the Institute of Tourism in Costa Rica started the first worldwide campaign, like the first country in the world to have a stop animal selfies campaign as like a hashtag. And I was just there in December, and they've really focused on ensuring that this campaign is out there. So if you go to like a tourism site, you might see like a sign with someone holding like a plush sloth or a plush like monkey. It's like, this monkey likes selfies. Now the real monkeys do not want to hug you. And so, yeah, they've been a country that's responded to the environmental and ethical concerns. And yeah, and what we can talk about it more, I guess. But yeah, there's also these like pockets around the country where there is this illegal tourism. And it's kind of this open secret that, oh, if you go on this mangrove boat tour, the guide feeds bananas to the monkeys and they'll come and they'll sit on you. And so there's certain sanctuaries that maybe have lax requirements. Oh, if you volunteer for a day or two, you get to feed a baby monkey. And those are they're very clandestine, but it's still easy to be offered them as a tourist going around. And if you don't know better, if you don't know, oh, like that's illegal, because no one's advertising that it's illegal necessarily, you might go into it and unknowingly participate in something like that. That's sort of where my research intersects. And so my PhD research was on wildlife sanctuaries in Costa Rica. And then I've been working with some friends that I met at a sanctuary in Costa Rica to publish on wildlife selfies. And so that's sort of the intersection of my interest there.
Yeah, it's an amazing intersection. I think across all three of you speaking here, there's kind of this human element of consuming something, and it's often an experience, or it's, with all of them, whether it's bullfighting or visiting monkeys while you sit on a boat or going to a cat cafe in Japan, there's this kind of, it seems to be this kind of quote unquote exotic idea of interacting with animals that people want to document. So the tourists, and I think perhaps this is where the Spanish example is slightly different, because when it comes to, correct me if I'm wrong here, Amanda, because I'm thinking here about tourists going to cat cafes, but I'm assuming loads of Japanese folks are also going to cat cafes and posting these images. Whereas for Spain, it's really bullfighting as part of national identity and pride in a way that's perhaps markedly different to these other areas. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a great question. I actually find them both similar in the sense that there's that intersection with national identity where you have foreigners going to Japan because they kind of associate like cuteness and animals and Japanese people. So there's a kind of conflation happening there in terms of national identity. Yes, in response to your question, it's both. It's two-pronged. So you both have local people going to these animal cafes, and it's framed a certain way and marketed a certain way to them. And then also international visitors, tourists also going to the cat cafes for different reasons. So locally, it's seen as part of what they call the Iyashi boom or the healing boom. So Japanese people it's marketed as, do you need a break? Do you need, kind of animal therapy, pet a cat? Your apartment's too small and maybe you can't have a pet. So this is a way for you to relax, have a cup of coffee, interact with an animal that you might not normally interact with. Whereas I think for international visitors, I think it's part of that quote unquote Japan experience. It's framed as this exotic, interesting, kawaii like thing to do in Japan. So I think it's interesting, and I think it connects a bit, Laura, to what you research, in that there is this kind of national aspect to it, or national identity aspect to it, sometimes self-imposed and sometimes imposed from the outside.
Well, regarding bullfighting, I was thinking that it has this component of like cultural national identity, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of people in Spain reject it. And of course, it is also a colonial practice that have been exported to Latin America as part of the colonization. So, I mean, it's quite problematic. It's also like these very patriarchal values of bravery and these ideas that, we're fighting non-human animals and, I don't know, showing their manhood and so on. But yeah, I mean, I think in that sense it's quite different. And what I know, but I didn't research deeply bullfighting, because I did my research around images and so on, but I focus more on farmed animals. But I would say that at least of what I know from my experience and the people that have researched a little bit more on that, a lot of international visitors don't enjoy bullfighting. It's quite the opposite. Like, people is traumatized after it, and I mean, there's kind of trick. Like, people think this is a cultural thing, and they try to know more about it, but then it's quite I don't know, sad and horrific. So, I mean, some people would enjoy, I guess, but the majority of them, I don't think so. And regarding children, they even prohibited like children assisting to these places, because it's an spectacle of torture, actually.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I think a lot of people who also engage in some of the tourism stuff that you're speaking about, Siobhan, I know that Jess Hooper, who we both know, who's done remarkable work with civets, they try to reach out to TripAdvisor to kind of speak explicitly about how using TripAdvisor as a platform is actually really an important space for highlighting that these are problematic practices. And they did an analysis of TripAdvisor to find out just how many people go to these tourist things, engage in the practice, and then afterwards say, oh, this was really awful and terrible, you shouldn't do it. And I know that scholars increasingly saying, well, do your homework before you go to the event, right? This kind of ad hoc, post hoc, I never know which hoc, after saying it afterwards is perhaps not fair. Do you see a similar thing happening in Costa Rica, where people engage in these practices and afterwards are perhaps regretful, or not really?
That's a really good question. I would have to look at the sorts of, what do you call it, attractions that are illegal. I would go look at like the 1-star and 2-star reviews usually and see if someone's mentioned animal abuse. I can't think of anything I've done recently looking at that, but I know that sometimes when tourists go to sanctuaries, it's actually kind of almost like the opposite, ironically, issue to what we're talking about, which is that folks think, oh, like they're in quite small enclosures. This is quite sad. I guess it is like a hospice, essentially. Part of my PhD, I did it's like surveys of tourists after visiting the 3 sanctuaries that I focused on. And all 3 sanctuaries had different forms of like tour guide, like spiel. And one of the ones that really focused on the fact that it is like a long-term care home for animals that can't be released because of anthropogenic impacts. The response was, it was a sobering experience. And I don't know if they went and then wrote that on TripAdvisor or anything, but at least in the feedback they gave to me, it was interesting to see. But then there were still some folks that said, oh, why is the enclosure small? Why is it kind of maybe not to the standard that you'd expect of like an accredited zoo? And I should mention, like, even though these sanctuaries in Costa Rica are legally zoos, they seek accreditation from the Global Federation of Sanctuaries, which is why I call them sanctuaries.
And it must also be said that just because a tourist, like, we're not all experts on all things, so perhaps that was a slightly unfair comparison of thinking about people who are going to like an overt civet, farm versus people going to visit a sanctuary and perhaps don't know the kind of material limitations on how a sanctuary can be put together. Okay, so thanks, guys, for indulging my random questions about tourists, and I'm sure we'll revisit them. But perhaps we can turn a bit more explicitly now to thinking about social media. And I'm going to start with a really basic question because I think it's useful, is just to say, what is social media? I think we all use it, but what do we mean when we say social media? Like, how is it distinct from other kinds of media?
I would say it is like a multi-directional communication media. I mean, that may be one of the characteristics, and also the fact that it is interactive in a way that it facilitates users to comment, to share content, to rate, to interact with other. They are also massive, but in a different way than the traditional media, like radio, TV, press, because it's not unidirectional, but yeah, this idea that of multidirectionality, I would say. And also, I would say it's also it's working in real time in a way, right? And it is connected with this algorithmic culture, so it's personal, like it has this personalization characteristics.
I totally agree with Laura here. I think for me, the key word that I was thinking was community. It has to be some sort of community, not necessarily a healthy one, but a community where people are, and you used the word, I think, exchange. So exchange is a big part of it. I don't know how to really say this with a cute little keyword or anything, but I was thinking about identity and the ways in which identity is fluid in a certain way online because you don't know who exactly you're talking to. You're not entirely sure if that username is the person that you're talking to, what gender they are, what country they're from, whether they're representing themselves accurately or not. So there's also this kind of unknown element there, as well as kind of anonymous element.
And it also seems that it seems to like borrow from other media, right? Like I was thinking podcasting is not a social media, but it is, it involves an interview and stuff, but it's not social media, but it is used, social media would be used to like disseminate this podcast or to try and reach a further reach for this medium, right? And the same thing is happening perhaps with movies so it's almost become very like a projection type. I don't know if that, like, and I'm not, you guys all have media study kind of background. Like, I've just, actually, I do too. I have a degree in journalism. Like, talk about it, a realization was a long time ago, okay? It was a degree from a long time ago, and social Facebook had just begun, okay? But I think there's also something about the kind of user-generatedness of it that not everybody can make a picture film, right, or feature film. Podcasting is definitely a much more democratic, I think, medium than many others. But perhaps a newspaper is, more exclusive than what Twitter would be or Blue Sky, etc. So yeah, any other sort of key characteristics of what makes social media social media? We've got exchange, we've got community, we've got dialogue, projection or
Speed.
Yeah, it's fast.
Personalization, maybe. And also I think it's multimedia in the sense that it facilitates like different formats, like the visual, audiovisual, text. Well, of course, it depends on the social media, but in general, I would say they are quite multimedia.
Yeah. All right. So why then should we be thinking about social media with regards to animals? And I think we've already hinted at some of this in our discussion, but what makes this an important intersection? Like why should we be focusing on social media as a particular form of media when it comes to thinking about animals?
I can start, and then actually I want to turn over to Siobhan because Siobhan, I think your research speaks like to this so directly. So I think social media is where we get a lot of our cultural narratives, assumptions, and debates about animals. And when I think about my particular topic, talking about animal cafes, it's ironically both the place that's really promoting this, especially for like international visitors. You have a lot of videos on YouTube where somebody will say like, watch me visit every single animal cafe in Tokyo in 24 hours or something like that. And then it promotes and gets people exoticizing it or excited to go, or one of the things that influencers want to check off on their list. At the same time, social media has a lot of the most intense sort of debates about this topic, and it's where a lot of concern and people trying to convince others who are going to Japan not to go to the animal cafe. So actually, Claudia, my quote is kind of connected to this. Should I do it now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I just used a quote from my research. So this is a quote from a user on the Reddit thread, Japan travel tips. And they were asking about Japan and animal cafes. Like, did people have advice on it or whatever? And the vast majority of comments were like, do not go. It is not ethical. And they also reference other social media in support of their argument to not go. So from a user responding to this request, asking about animal cafes. Quote, I initially wanted to visit the pig cafe in Japan too, but I reconsidered after watching a few Instagram reels and TikToks about the cafe, as well as reading Google reviews. Visitors to the cafe observed that the pigs are highly stressed, squeal a lot, and have multiple bite marks on their bodies, biting each other due to stress. I would suggest you research it a bit more before committing to a decision. So that's a quote from there. So I like that quote a lot, even though it's not super interesting. It's really connecting, it's on social media, and then it's citing other forms of social media. And it's this kind of debate that's happening internationally before the person even goes to the animal cafe. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I'll leave it at that. Siobhan, I thought your work is so fascinating and really, really speaks to the heart of this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Please join me for the Nature Disturbed podcast, a podcast about the good, the offensive, and the confusing parts of the animal kingdom, from the sewers of Florida searching for alligators. Oh no, did I forget to put the bins out? To the surface of Mars, investigating the possibility of life beyond Earth. Sorry, I had some bubbles lodged in my throat. I said, to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, all while interviewing scientists about their research along the way. Do you like comedy, whimsical storytelling, and learning about the natural world? If not, then you'll hate the Nature Disturbed podcast.
Okay, yes, absolutely. I think that social media in this case is very much a double-edged sword, because I find it to be quite a reactionary platform, and folks can express outrage at the same time as they can commend something and incite interest in it. So in terms of wildlife selfies and animal selfies, I guess we'll focus on wildlife selfies because that's more of the ethical, sticky area. Research shows that these sorts of images where you're in close contact with animals, even anthropomorphized images, that also can vary depending on whether they're super realistic like AI or if they're a sketch, might not have the same impact. But basically, these sorts of images do influence consumer desire for having wild animals as pets. And so an example that always comes to mind is when the Harry Potter movies came out, there was an uptick in folks wanting snowy owls in England. And when Finding Nemo came out, there was an uptick in people wanting, I think it was a clownfish. So there is a direct impact on folks' desire to have animals that are represented in these selfies and movies. I just watched Chimp Crazy, which is a documentary that the Tiger King folks did yesterday, and I'd been putting it off, but I watched it to prepare for this. And, folks are selling chimpanzees, which is not legally, it's not illegal to do in the United States, despite the fact that they're an endangered species. And they're basically it's kind of like a closed loop, as far as I could tell, of Facebook groups devoted to showing the lifestyle you can have with basically these child chimpanzees. The folks in the documentary refer to them as, this is my kid. And if you go on Etsy, which, often I'll search monkey something on Etsy to find a monkey pin or a monkey painting, I somehow got shoved. The algorithm started showing me clothes for squirrel monkeys and spider monkey babies, baby doll outfits for baby squirrel monkeys and spider monkeys. And I started Googling who was reviewing them, looking at them on Facebook, and it's so easy. I even joined a pet monkey Facebook group just to have access to the posts. I posted, this is horrendous, you're taking them away from their mom and raising them in captivity, instantly deleted the comment. So it's very much a closed loop kind of club, kind of feels like that, secret club. And that's just that's not even that clandestine. I could just log on and go. So I'm not sure what other sort of forums exist on social media that are really hidden and not easy to access as an outsider.
I think that's such a good point. I mean, it speaks to what we were talking about there about the characteristics of social media. I mean, just there you mentioned both kind of how algorithms drive the consumption, but also this sense of community. And I think in today's world of isolation and perhaps not feeling understood and a lot of conflict, no matter what your interests are and how niche you think they might be, you can probably find a community online that gets it, right? And this is both wonderful and terrifying. It's wonderful in that people who are perhaps isolated, are able to find folks that they connect with. But it's terrifying in that sometimes what people are connecting over are depraved and violent, and I'm using depraved and violent, not even, like things can get really, really dark online, and people can find their people who aren't judging them for that darkness, right? Who are there with them in the corner, consuming and interacting in the same way. And the fact that you can have these kind of like support groups for, well, you've got a tiger in your basement. How do you manage your tiger? Like the democratization of the internet has meant that you can find support for whatever it is you're up to, right?
Yes, absolutely. I just like as a aside, but I swear it relates. Unless someone wanted to jump in there. In the case of Costa Rican sanctuaries, part of the reason why sometimes these like sites might look to our eyes like, oh, this is kind of small, is because these sanctuaries are working with like the second, like an older generation of enclosures, and they are completely self-funded by tourists. So a lot of the sanctuaries I was there in 2019 doing field work, and I went back this past December. So about 5 years had passed. Almost all the sanctuaries had different enclosures and larger enclosures that I worked with. So it's fantastic. They just need like the time and the money and the resources. And so it's interesting that like folks would maybe go to a sanctuary and say, oh, they look sad and kind of, enclosed. But actually, this is the only place these animals could be, short of like, honestly, like probably being euthanized because they can't be released because they've lived in captivity their whole lives. And so one of the sanctuaries has a spider monkey called Darwin. And I had posted a video on YouTube of me on my personal account, like talking to him through the enclosure, and somebody found him that had a spider monkey called Darwin that was taken from her in, I think, Tennessee. And she found my Facebook, all from this like YouTube video that had like 5 views, and started messaging me and saying, that's Darwin. They took him from me. He grew up with my son. Here's pictures of him. And it was a spider monkey in like a giant southern home swimming in a pool with like children. And I immediately thought, that's not the same monkey as the one in the video I had. It was not that hard to tell it was not the same monkey. And I said, and she was just like kind of coming after me. Where was he? Where'd you see him? I'm like, I'm not telling you. Also, there's no chance that a spider monkey you bought in Tennessee is one in Costa Rica who I know came from in like private ownership in Costa Rica. Like I know that it just doesn't add up. So I had to block her. But it was just very interesting how she felt so emotional. And like Claudia, you were saying, like the community, the connection, like folks really feel strongly, to put it like, about, and I think when the animals are taken away from them, if they're having wildlife in captivity, like a strong sense of injustice, which is part of why folks like go on these shows like Tiger King and Chimp Crazy and advertise effectively to the world that they're doing illegal activities with endangered species, because they feel a strong sense of injustice, and that these sorts of documentaries and this sort of media showcasing their special bond to this animal is going to turn the tide of public opinion or something.
You raised something interesting there with regards to the voice used in social media, because one of the posts I was reading about leading up to this was about how people might moderate their views on what they are seeing or what they are consuming, both in terms of how outraged they are, but also in terms of how moderated they are. So depending on which platform they're on. So if they're commenting on LinkedIn versus on Twitter, they might be using a very different voice in terms of how they are responding to the same content. But to your point, also people tend to, there's a blurring of boundaries. Kind of, you wouldn't speak to people in the way you speak to people online sometimes, right? Like the aggression that can come forward and the bluntness that can come forward with some messaging is quite startling. But like you say, people feel a strong sense of injustice. And this points, I guess, to some of the kind of normative aspects of this, Laura. Maybe you can walk us through this, because this speaks a little bit to this kind of like social movement or social mobilization, as well as this idea of moral shock is one aspect of that, but this is speaking to social mobilization, conflicting social mobilization, I suppose.
Yes, I completely agree with what you said. Like these emotional connections that, I don't know, for instance, I think in this world, we're having these individual narratives. So we're very much looking to create connections and to create communities. So I think social media has this part. And as all of you mentioned, this has a good part, like positive aspect of it, especially if we think about organization and social movements, because yeah, I mean, a lot of people start thinking about animal ethics, animal rights, and doesn't feel like anyone in their networks are thinking about this, and could be like a very isolating feeling. And then when you find some other people advocating for non-human animals, or I don't know, sharing recipes of vegan food or whatever thing that involves a better life for non-human animals, I think in that sense, social media can be good. And also, regarding this moral shock, I mean, I'm not so sure about how positive it is or how fruitful the moral shock strategy is for social media, because as we mentioned before, these algorithmic cultures and algorithmic infrastructures, it feels like sometimes it's more like an echo chamber around like animal rights activists exposing ourselves to these violent graphic images and videos, and sometimes it's not quite open to other users, but at the same time I think it's necessary, like these undercover investigations, and how people, by knowing them, kind of can stop participating in the exploitation or start being part of a campaign. I don't know, I mean, it's quite complex. I think when you start researching and thinking about it, it's more complicated and not so easy to to kind of like think about it. And
It's not a matter of saying it's right or wrong, or it's good or it's bad. It's
yes,
more
exactly,
it's more complicated. And
complex. Yes,
I mean, I
yes.
suppose when it comes to recording, let's say, violent images of animals in industrial agriculture, right, and sharing it to say, there are some instances where this is very explicit about a specific farm. This farm is breaking the law, and this farm needs to be held to account. And I think activists put their lives and their liberty in harm's way, right, to make these videos and to get them out and to hold the farmers in these instances accountable. But I also wonder if, it depends again what the object of the share is doing. If it's that, I 100% understand what's happening. But if it's to prove that this is happening, right? If it's to prove that animals are hurt in industrial agriculture, then I have to wonder, well, surely we've got enough evidence of that, right? Like there's enough exposure and violent imagery, and ever since Earthlings, the amount of just, I guess, violent images, and it's done, I think, some good work. It's converted. No, that's not the right word. It's changed people's minds. Sometimes overnight, sometimes through repeated exposure to these. But on the other hand, this is just a hunch of mine. Is there research to suggest that the kind of exposure to this moral shock or these violent images does that kind of work? Does it do that? This is just my sense from interacting with people. But I mean, you've looked a little into this, right?
Yeah. In my PhD, I researched exactly this. So what I kind of found out is that it affects and it works, especially for people who already has a level of consciousness. For instance, people who is vegetarian and is care about non-human animals, but I don't know, still participates in some animal exploitation consumption. For instance, for these people, this kind of visual moral shock visuals can be quite effective, because it's like they already have some values, so this kind of footage kind of activate it, And there's a profile of animal activists that kind of overnight after watching these kind of visuals decided that they wanted to change their behavior and also their habits and fight for other animals. But still, of course, there's people who can't resonate with this kind of approach. And that's why I think we need more complex approaches and to use all the visual tools that we have. And I remember when you were describing at the start of the podcast the image of the bull in the place, and I think like animal resistance in that sense, like these kind of narratives that show not only the violence towards non-human animals, but also how they are resisting and trying to fight against that actively. And that is not only the physical and more explicit violence, but also like how the whole infrastructure of animal oppression is hurting other animals and not letting them be what like their own personalities and their own beings. I think that narratives are quite interesting. And also like the sanctuaries that Siobhan was mentioning, I think quite interesting as well. Like how can an individual that has been hurt now live in a, okay, maybe not completely free, but in a safe place. And when she or he is recognized, I don't know, there's a lot of food for thought, I think, regarding these approaches. And I think maybe a mixture of all of them would be the key.
Yeah. I mean, I know that when it comes to, sharing of films and stuff, when animals break away, when they break out, as it were, whether it was a lorry that was carrying animals or from a circus, or consumers of that footage invariably find themselves supporting the animal who's broken away, right? Even if that animal ends up getting captured back by the industry who they were broken from, there's something I feel like we understand to some extent, like, and maybe it's just because it's a hero's story or it's a story of resistance where you can see them very clearly showing and fighting back or just running and getting away. And there's been so many examples of this. I think, was it last year or 2 years ago, of the cows in Canada? It was 3 cows that broke free from a lorry and they couldn't capture them for several months. These cows like lived through Canadian winter near Quebec, which is blooming cold, and they evaded capture. And people created a lot of ambivalent feelings because people were now interested in these animals, and they were kind of making a mockery of the institutions that were trying to capture them because they couldn't. They kind of disproved many of the ideas we have about cows of being docile and not capable. All right. So thank you, all of you. So, okay, social media. We keep talking about like animals and animal relations, which is part of it, but let's try to bring this back to kind of social media and this connection between social media and animals. So what we've highlighted is, one, social media can be an amplifying force, right? It can amplify the violence that's committed to animals, but it can also amplify efforts to kind of stop those. So there is a kind of war going on here. Not war. I was going to say a battle, but I was trying to find something that's less confrontational. But there is a push and pull going on there with regards to how animal stories are being amplified. But of course, there are also people making money on social media using animals, right? So it's not just that they are moving around in other economies. There are literal influencers or petfluencers or people that are using social media as a mechanism to make money. And do you guys, I've got some ideas, but let me hand it over to you. Do you guys have any thoughts on this, or perhaps specific platforms, specific ways in which this is being done?
I could speak from the research that I've been doing. I've noticed, and it also speaks a little bit to what you were talking about earlier, Claudia, about different platforms kind of platforming different, framing the discourse in a certain way. So looking at the ways in which Anglophone people are consuming animal cafes in Japan, I see a lot more nuanced critical discussion happening over on Reddit. Whereas when you speak of influencers, like there's a very popular trend on YouTube of people going to pet cafes and like counting how many they can go to, or live streaming themselves going and visiting a ton of them. So it's a much more celebratory sort of influencery, like it's a mishmash of this kind of very exoticizing, I'm going to Japan culture mixed with exoticizing animals, right? And the ways that they're bound together, I find really fascinating in terms of the stories that we tell about Japan and the ways in which Western cultures tend to frame Japanese culture or consuming Japanese culture in terms of consumption, in terms of cuteness, in terms of these kinds of experiences, like experience Japan, experience cool, weird, strange, kawaii Japan. So yeah, so I definitely think, as you were saying, the monetizing, people who are monetizing influencers have a big voice, I think, in trying to promote this to a lot of people online through social media.
And I think this is also something that's quite distinct about social media, is there is this like performative aspect to social media, right? It's not performance in the same way you have actors. It's people that are performing a persona, and it can be quite damaging, right? It can be socially damaging also for the people who are participating in it, and leads to a whole host of bizarre social interactions. Laura, I know that you had your hand up there as well.
Yeah, I wanted to share research I'm doing with my colleague Tuğçe Ataçi. She's from Turkey, and we are trying to research. We were thinking about how to kind of advocate for an incorporation of the animal standpoints within feminist media studies. So we decided, we started more like as a theoretical reflection, but then we end up researching female hunters on Instagram. So we were looking on how these representations of female hunters were also part of professional productions, in the sense that they sell guns or they sell different products. So it connects with what you said about money. Like they created not only a narrative on identity, for instance, family, and this traditional idea of being part of a family, looking after your kids, being a mom, and so on, but also being like a rural, a lot of terms, themes in terms of identity, but also you can see you can follow the money in a way, because they became their own, like they create business on it, and I mean, there's a whole profitable part of these influencers. And also we were also interested in this algorithm and how this, when you follow, because we created an account for the research, and as we started following more and more female hunters, both from Turkey, Spain, but also internationally, they were recommending more and more. So how that that use of social media for perpetuating harms and othering of other animals would be, I mean, the algorithm and the infrastructure will favor this behavior, and will favor like this identification and so on. So
Yeah, I mean, using social media to do research was actually something I was hoping to talk to you about in a moment. So I'm happy you brought that up. But I just want to continue with this thread again that we're talking about here of influencers and people making money through social media. Because I've been approached now with the podcast. It's interesting how readily you get approached now to be promoters of things. And it's quite clearly people that don't understand the Animal Turn as a brand or what it stands for, kind of reaching out saying, hey, we think you'd be a great ambassador for this pet clothing line. And I'm like, whoa, you're literally talking to the wrong person. So there is this kind of like predatory thing also happening, I suppose, because people want to, and maybe that's something we haven't touched on in terms of our definition of social media. There is an aspirational quality to social media. People who create accounts, it's not just performance. I mean, there can oftentimes be a vapid performance element, but there is also an aspirational element. People trying to build a brand or build an identity. And your hunting example there, as well as the Japanese travel example, I think shows a little bit of this. It's people trying to create a niche and a brand, and perhaps sometimes being influenced themselves by corporate interests, right? So you might have had these hunters doing and having social media, but then they start getting purchased, and then gun people start to contact them and say, hey, we think you'd be a great brand ambassador. Don't you mind? And they realize they can make money doing that. And then you get more of that content, right? And the animals obviously get lost in both of these, whether it's the tourist who's traveling across the world showing all the different cafes and the different quirky, fun things of different cultures. So yeah, I really find that quite interesting. Siobhan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. Gosh, not to like keep bringing it back to Tiger King, but I just found there was so much there in terms of intersections of exoticism, cult of personality, gender relations. So one of the characters in Tiger King who's like he's not Joe Exotic, which is it's a whole other story that was like the face of it, is Doc Antle. Also, I think he called himself like Bhagavad, which I'm not sure if that's a Southeast Asian handle to kind of come across as a guru. So there's like another level there. But he effectively runs a cult. And he's been charged with like up to 10 years in prison, $250,000. I'm not sure if he's done any of that prison time yet, but he was convicted, I think, as part of the Tiger King sort of saga, and has these compounds with like tigers, and he has these women. And I just like it's such a clear intersection of vulnerable folks who become taken in by this kind of cult of personality, who has a lot of wild animals, and they're empathetic people and vulnerable people often. Like some of them were young women who were running away from bad situations and, come take care of baby tigers. And the women being interviewed on this documentary were saying like, well, I was there for the tigers. I'm sure like many of us have been in a situation where we were, standing by on a sense of justice and care, even if we wanted to get out of that situation, whether for animals, children, whatever. So there's something really interesting and insidious about the fact that these chiefly men, although lots of women, as I saw in the Chimp Crazy documentary as well, have this sort of like untouchable status of like, I deserve this because I've put in the time and the money. And they kind of, I think, feed off of that, the awe that folks have for them, for kind of like, it's like this, like being this like lion king or this like lion tamer in like a modern era. And the fact that it comes with women, or in the case of Joe Exotic, who's a gay man, came in the case of vulnerable young men. It's interesting that it cross-sectioned this like animal and probably human exploitation. We're like totally entangled. And I'll just mention that Cody Antle is Doc Antle's son, and he is one of the most popular TikTok like wild animal influencers. And I've lost count of how many videos I've reported of him like swimming with a tiger, playing like basketball with monkeys, and they never get banned. Anything I've like reported on Instagram, on TikTok, they don't get banned. And it's so hard to actually like flag it, like report. Often I have to go to like this, I'm reporting this for illegal trade of animals. Like there's no, and if there is animal abuse as a option, it's like, well, yeah, this kinkajou, which is a nocturnal tropical animal, is under fluorescent lights being fed Cheetos. That was like literally a video. It's not being taken down. It's her legal pot. So I don't know if it's like bots that are running these reports. I think like just the engagement with even like the moral outrage and the engagement of bringing up this video, it getting pushed to people within our social circle. I feel like the amorphousness of how this algorithm works and how you are forced to interact with it to report it and express moral outrage just as like creates this insidious, not to sound like a Luddite, but like just like this insidious like thing where you're really fighting against a lot of systems, including artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I think insidious is the right word here in many ways. Because, at the end of the day, what a lot of social media is running after, I mean, we're talking about money, but it's running after views and it's running after likes, right? Clicks, like it's a click marathon. And also, I mean, so I think I want to highlight two organizations here that people can go to if they want to flag stuff that they think is inappropriate. With regards to wild animals, I recently had someone on from Four Paws with regards to like wild cats, big cats in particular. Four Paws now has a reporting tool that if you suspect someone of using or abusing large wild cats, they've got a tool there where you can report them. And I encourage people to go and check out Four Paws and make use of that, perhaps with accounts such as that. And then also, I don't know if you are a lot are aware of Social Media Cruelty Coalition. I was on their site just before we came here, and they're starting to release reports about specific accounts and specific activity that is being used and done that is using animal cruelty as a mechanism to make money. And I'm happy you used the word insidious, because sometimes it's not as obvious as someone swimming with a tiger where you say, oh, well, that's awful. There are people now staging animal rescues. I couldn't believe it. It's something like a quarter of all the videos on social media accounts like Instagram and YouTube, etc., are staged animal rescues, right? So it's something that's tugging at our heartstrings instead of that aspirational quality we were talking about. And then they follow up with asking for donations, right, so that they can save more people, more animals. So, and that's really insidious as well. So I'm flagging that here because if you're watching these videos, check out the Social Media Animal Cruelty Coalition, because we're prone to being tricked. We are. We like to think we're really smart apes, but we're really prone to being tricked, right? So maybe we can go back here to talking about the relationship between social media and research. And I think that this is, we've spoken about some of the negative aspects. We've spoken about the fact that social media can be used to promote, I guess, animal liberation, or at least help places like sanctuaries, etc., to show that there is another way of thinking about animals. There is also another aspect to social media where we could use it to research animal interactions in a whole host of interesting ways. So, Laura, you mentioned there the algorithm, and I actually, as you said it, I was like, wow, it's a new form of snowballing method, right? Like when you used to do interviews, you had to hope that the person you were interviewing would introduce you to other people, and over time you would snowball and end up with this big data set of people to interview. But the algorithm is helping you out here, right?
Yes, exactly. And our idea was also to kind of explore if the algorithm would effectively incorporate like this related content with hunters. And it did, of course, as it does with whatever topic and whatever community. But of course, it has this risk. Like it starts, for instance, if we think about cults that Siobhan mentioned, it could be similar, like, it kind of close the issue and get you to a very specific community. In a way, it's opening because you get to know people from all over. But at the same time, it can be very damaging if this community is hurting other animals. So, and it can distort our relationships with them. So yes, we were interested in doing it. We also had to pass this ethical process because it was the first time I conducted research on a social media. But yeah, the good thing is it's public. So, in a way, it's easier. But still, we will be careful with not producing more violence and so on. But yeah, I think it's interesting to explore it, like in an infrastructure level, and of course in a representation level as well.
That's such a good point. I hadn't even thought about how, I was just thinking about using an algorithm to find more content, I guess, in effect, that you could analyze, not necessarily in terms of how my pursuing that content, again, adds to their watches, their likes, their content, which perpetuates the very consumption I've been critical of here, right? And I think that's a tricky thing for researchers in a range of fields to encounter, right? So like Amanda, even with you, going to cat cafes, encountering cat cafes. And I know that your views on this have changed over time and over conducting this research. But is this something that you've also thought about? Like how is using social media, I guess, part of your project, and has it raised any of these ethical quandaries for you?
The point that you just raised about how we're also kind of fueling the algorithm and the views and the likes, like that hadn't occurred to me either. And now I'm like, oh man. So something to think about. So in terms of how I'm using social media, mostly it's I'm examining and comparing across, YouTube, like in Anglophone discourse. I look at YouTube, various Reddit threads, and news articles and how are they framing it? What are their headlines? How has it potentially changed over time? And then for Japan, people in Japan are quite active on Twitter. So Twitter, again, YouTube is very popular. A site called Nico Nico are all popular places for people to talk about it. But now I'm like thinking a little bit about how am I generating some effects as I access these different things.
Yeah, I think like on a positive note, although it's like definitely actionable research, there is some research that shows that priming tourists and folks to identify unethical wildlife attractions and attraction toward animals are kind of being held against their will, sort of around the framing of like, I guess like consent. Like, does it look like the chained up, drugged, sedated tiger is able to willingly consent to this interaction? I'm trying to find ways to frame it so that the quote unquote average person can be like, yeah, that doesn't look like that animal has bodily autonomy nor is doing well. And yeah, I think so. Some research does show that priming folks prior to going on a trip, there's research by Morehouse et al. Out of Wild Period Oxford that like made like fake tourism web pages and then primed them and said, okay, can you like look through this web page and then find the kind of unethical ones and what looks unethical about that. So the priming does seem to work and help kind of change public opinion. I think quite a lot of research shows that given how big wildlife tourism is, how entangled it is with the wildlife trade, the pet industry, the exotic pet industry, like the legal and illegal wildlife trade, it's so hard to honestly like to study and to kind of pinpoint, like even wildlife tourism and domestic animal tourism can intersect, right? So yeah, given that it's so difficult to kind of regulate it globally or have sort of general kind of norms about what we should be looking for in terms of ethical interactions, I think a lot of researchers tend to say, okay, it has to kind of come from the ground up with priming, with changing how we influence people, giving like it having informed tourists. And I think one of the challenges to that is what we talked about at the beginning, the like ad hoc, post hoc, like attraction. Like sometimes you'll go somewhere. I think there's an example in Morocco. There's like Barbary macaques that are kind of like chained up, and there'll be like keepers, quote unquote, that come with the macaque and they'll like take a photo with it. And the research there from Zacher and McKinnon found that a lot of tourists were like disturbed by this, and it was an illegal activity. They didn't know. The ones that did take photos with the monkeys were saying, oh, it's kind of novel, but it was something that was kind of there, not as a specific wildlife tourism or wildlife selfie attraction. It was just available. So there's all these sorts of intersections that make it difficult to kind of intervene. But I think, yeah, the priming and the regulations just like need to be forefronted.
Yeah, regulations are key. And I mean, you mentioned the intersections, and intersections have come up, I think, across all of, and it's a key part of this season is kind of thinking through these intersections. All right, folks, I've already almost had you for an hour and a half. I'm sorry. I think it's a rich and interesting topic. Why don't we turn to the quotes? Laura, let's start with yours.
I have a quote that it's from this book, Critical Animal and Media Studies, and it's quite broad in a way. It's connected to media in general, and it's from Debra Merskin in the chapter Media Theories. Sorry, one sec. Media Theories and the Crossroads of Critical Animal and Media Studies. So I read. As has been made clear in the long history of scholarship on the representation in media of women and people of color, the symbolic and the real are connected. If we only know other animals based on mediated representations, they mostly appear happy and healthy. However, behind these cheerful cows, plump pigs, dancing dogs, and corporate monkeys, billions of non-human animals are tortured and killed and served to us as the objects of laboratory experimentation, as laborers in entertainment, as clothing, as pets, and as food. The uneven application of dominance affection in this one-way relationship has a significant impact on the future of our own species as well as theirs. So that's my quote.
Super powerful. What made you choose that quote?
Because, well, I was thinking about this cultural violence and the idea that these social media representations in the end had an impact on like actual animals. So this connection of representation and actual experiences of non-human animals.
And I like that you raised there the kind of the happy images, because we've tended to focus in this episode on talking about the violence and almost the explicitly negative looking images. When we were talking about influencers earlier, one of the things I'd never encountered before was a petfluencer, and how people are constantly, they've got whole accounts dedicated to people's specific pets. And just some folks raising concerns about, how these end up being staged and how this can create stress. And you need to be, and that's one form of happy. But of course, the happy farm is a different, what work is the media doing in effect? It's asking for a form of critique here. Who is posting it and why would they be posting this? Whether it's an activist or a corporation or an individual, we need to think like, what's behind the image, right?
So my quote comes from Rosemary-Claire. She's an animal geographer and political ecologist. She has a book, Animal Traffic, and this is the quote from there that I'm always thinking about. So, a wildlife is one in which animals engage in their own life-making practices until they die. There is no guarantee of flourishing, only the conditions of possibility for a degree of creative self-determination and community. The animal is not only able to look back, it is able to disappear from sight. It is not a mere animal mirror, polished, as Haraway says, so that I can look for myself, but enclosed life, like the life of an exotic pet, cannot but disappoint, as John Berger has famously said at the zoo. Captive, dominated, controlled worlds leave little room for open endings. Yeah, and I see the work of Costa Rican sanctuaries really in tension with this idea of trying to create a world of self-determination and being able to, for me, I see this quote, it's so beautiful and philosophically rich, but also it relates to good welfare practices for animals, that animals in captivity in like zoos should be able to hide. They should have a degree of agency. They should be afforded these, the ability to life make in ways that feel comfortable for them, even if it's not necessarily what we have studied to be their natural behavior. For me, I just see a lot of overlap with like good practices for having wildlife that can't be released into the wild, that are in sanctuaries, as informing, their agency and their self-interest.
It's really beautiful. And I mean, if I could take it another step further to kind of, again, bring it back to the social media focus was, this idea of a captured animal could be thought of in several ways. The actual material, physical animal whom we're most concerned with and how they're impacted by a whole host of impacts. And like you said, John Berger said, when you see the animal in the zoo, they're deficient because you've got an imagined idea or an ideal of this animal, and you'll never fully see that, especially when they're being held captive, right? In that way. But the same thing can perhaps be said for the ways in which animals are captured in images, right? Like, this is a specific moment of a specific animal's life. It's not the tiger you see in that photo or that post or that Instagram reel is a specific animal who's experiencing whatever you're seeing. And we can't view them as a stand-in for all other animals' experiences. And we need to, I think, be sober with that. Like, this is one specific situation that could speak to a systematic issue, but it's being experienced by an individual. And two, we need to be cautious about how much purchase we put into that one frame, right? Of saying, oh, this is everything. This animal's living a great and glorious life. Or like, we need to ask more questions, I think, is important. And to realize, as you're saying with the sanctuaries, that there are things outside of our control and our choosing as well, and for the animals too. And we have to sometimes make best with what we've got. But I think we can hold more people to account when it comes to the content they're sharing online, right? Like holding people to account who are operating with the sanctuary in a flawed system, and holding people to account who are trying to make money off of animals online. There's different levels of accountability at play here. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Before we close, why don't you tell the listeners what you're working on and if they want to get in touch with you, how they can do so. Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So in terms of this research, I'm just working on this paper right now related to this topic, comparative study of Japanese and Anglophone framing of animal cafes online. I'm also, this is random, but I'm writing a textbook on learning Japanese through anime studies. That is due on August 1st. So that's my real, pressure. I have to finish it. If you want to get in touch with me, talk about anything related to Japanese media studies, feel free to contact me at A Weiss, WEISS 36 at GATECK. That's GodTech for GeorgiaTech.edu. Thank you.
Great. I'll make sure it's all on the show notes as well. Siobhan?
I'm working on right now a chapter for an edited volume that's being led by Nicoletta Bettini, who works for the Royal Swedish Bank, and she's like an economist. And this book is about trying to find an economical way to inform policymakers that animals should be valued as inherent beings. And so it's slightly out of my wheelhouse in terms of the economic side of it, but my chapter is on wildlife tourism and looking at the economics of the industry and the policies that are working. For example, like Costa Rican sanctuaries is one kind of case study in that. The ways that we can be kinder to animals through tourism, that we can espouse ethical attractions and find ways to still make them beneficial to the sort of the holistic community of the host tourism community there, and then the multi-species. I think of it as like a multi-species community, right? So yeah, that's sort of what I'm working on right now. And just today, a paper of mine got published, which is exciting because I didn't expect it yet. But it's a field-based conservation welfare assessment for Costa Rican sanctuaries. And that comes out of my PhD work. And it's, basically a way to assess sanctuaries in terms of the welfare and conservation outcomes that they provide.
Amazing. Fantastic work. I remember you talking about that. So I'm happy that it's out there in the world. Congratulations, Siobhan. And if people want to reach out to you, it's the Animal Welfarist, right?
Yeah, the animalwelfarist.ca. And then it has all my social links and my email on there.
Fantastic. And Laura?
I'm working in the first, congratulations, Siobhan, for the paper published.
Oh, thank you.
I'm currently working on this research that I mentioned around Instagram and female hunters with my colleague Tutsi Atachi, and also we're thinking about it from more a theoretical perspective, and we are working on a chapter around LGBT media studies and how we can incorporate these animal standpoints. So I think it's an interesting discussion to go beyond commodification of other animals, also in representation and so on, and incorporating these gender studies lens. And basically this, but I'm still working or trying to keep in contact with my PhD topic, which is these images of violence and moral shock and social movement. So in a way, I still work on that, and I'm thinking about a chapter regarding an undercover investigation that came out here in Spain in a research lab, and to think about how it made an impact regarding mobilization and how this moral shock is still, in a way, necessary to keep active these campaigns and so on. So that would be basically what I'm working on right now.
So interesting. And that's not even something we got into. I mean, we said it could maybe change people's minds. But there's several instances of activists having real tangible results with closing specific labs or practices. I mean, the mink farming in Denmark was largely attributed to social activists getting on the ground and sharing footage of what was happening at the beginning of COVID-19, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm correct. I literally doubt everything I say. I don't know why I'm the host of a podcast anymore. I've lost track of time. I'm like, was it this year or was it 5 years ago? I don't know, but I'm sure it happened at some point. while I lose my mind, thank you for being fantastic guests today and for helping me understand and think through social media a bit more. It's been a delight to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Laura, Amanda, and Siobhan, for a wonderful conversation with so much rich detail and thought. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you also to Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, A.P.P.L.E, for sponsoring this podcast, and the Pollination Project, the School of Modern Language, the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts, as well as the School of Literature, Media and Communication at Georgia Tech University for co-sponsoring this season. The bed music was composed by Gordon Clark and the logo designed by Jeremy John. This episode was produced, hosted, and edited by myself. This is The Animal Turn, with me, Claudia Hopenfelder.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.